My name's Kyle Farmer. I work for UC Cooperative here in Mendocino County. I'm also a volunteer firefighter, so a lot of what I'm sharing today is, based on experience responding to escaped burn piles in Potter Valley. And I'm also here, from the perspective of the Mendocino County Prescribed Burn Association. And I am, I think, 2 signatures left on my CARX Burn Boss certification. So hopefully I'll have that buttoned up by the next, by the spring or something like that. So I'm going to be talking to you guys about weather today, weather considerations for pile burns. As Lania mentioned, we tend to think about broadcast burning as riskier than pile burning, but they hold their own risks. And in many cases, the relationship that you have of a pile to unburned fuel actually adds some complexity. John covered a lot about the safety aspects, and inevitably he was going to be getting into weather. So he's kind of covered a couple of these topics, but hopefully going into a little more detail will be helpful for everybody. So why does weather matter? I kind of categorize these in 2 things. Public health, you really want to understand when you call your air quality district what they're looking at. So I'll kind of give you a little detail into what they're thinking about. It is important to remember that every air quality district is different. I chatted with Warren Massey, who I haven't gone to the pub with him yet, but I do consider him a friend. And I would definitely second that the better relationship you can have with your air quality district, the easier it is going to be to get burning done. He mentioned, for example, that in Mendocino County, the holidays are non-burn days. So every county is going to have funny little things you're going to have to learn about. It also helps to know how your particular county deals with CAL FIRE giving no burn days. In our example, Mendocino County air quality districts gets informed by 1 p.m. the day before the next day if CAL FIRE would like to determine it a non-burn day due to unsafe wind conditions. But you can never trust your air quality district's no burn. If they say it's a permissive burn day, they are not necessarily saying it's a safe burn day. They're saying it's a safe burn day from a public health perspective. So weather matters for choosing when and if to burn, and also adapting your decisions after you light. And I'd say the same for risk of escape. Understanding how fire weather works allows you to choose your burn windows, and it also allows you to make decisions if weather conditions change while you're burning. And these kind of combine to ensure that we maintain our social license to use prescribed fire as a tool, and even, as Lania mentions, expanding our social license to use fire as a tool. So when it comes to weather and public health, there's really just one word: inversions. Can get pretty complex, and you will get pretty complex if you choose to pursue the Burn Boss certification. But inversions in the end are pretty simple. The way I think about it is, if you look at a mountain, where's the snow? We all know it's at the top. Air temperature normally decreases with height. And inversion is just, it's a little bit upside down. And what that does is it forms a cap and traps the air. And so on an inversion day, and air quality can predict that and address that. They usually can, they can't always. They will call it a no burn day, because what they're worried about is that inversion is going to cause a lot of smoky haze to hang out close to the ground and impact maybe not your valley, maybe not your mountain, but it may be even the next valley over. So in my case here in Mendocino County, most of my burning is at home in Potter Valley. It's really not Potter Valley that's going to suffer for some of my burning, but even some of the valleys in Lake County, if I'm not careful. You could have an inversion layer over there, it'll settle into the valley, and they will not be happy about it. That gets also important when it comes to your neighbors. If they have health issues, part of your smoke management plan is going to be addressing things like, if you're at that scale, local hospitals or schools. Grapes are an increasingly big concern when it comes to inversion layers and bringing smoke down to the ground. So that inversions are the main thing that air quality is looking at. And you can trust them by determining no burn days. They'll be kind of have your back to figure out days that it's not safe from a public health perspective to burn. this map is at a countrywide scale, but this is an important concept here at a sort of a smaller scale as well. We're always impacting, these are wildfires impacting, at a statewide scale. Even a series of burn piles can have an impact at a neighborhood scale if we don't look at the air quality concepts. So risks of escape is the second concern here. The reason why we really want to be able to know what's going to happen with the weather. We're really lucky these days to have these incredible weather prediction tools at our fingertips in our pockets. Weather matters in terms of risk of escape for three reasons you can lose a pile, and John already actually covered these. One would be direct heat transfer to nearby vegetation. So being too close to a leaf tree, being too close to that beautiful redwood barn we saw in the picture. These are cases where too big a pile, too much heat, a little bit of wind, and next thing you know, the tree next to you is on fire and spreading from there. The other is rollout. John also covered this when it comes to the directionality that he recommends creating burn piles. Rollout would mean that a piece of material, especially, we're dealing with circles, we're dealing with logs. They roll pretty well, especially when they've been bucked short. And weather matters when it comes to rollout because temperature and humidity will determine how receptive the fuel is to that rollout. So if you're burning on a hot, dry day, you're going to be more concerned about rollout because the fuel that log will be rolling through will be catching on fire easier. And the third that we really have the most control over by using the weather forecast is to really think about ember cast. So ember cast is determined by weather. It's also determined by the height of origin. This is a picture that we have here isn't of a burn pile, it's of a forest fire. It's the same principle. If you build your pile tall, it's going to be able to cast further. And then as it's casting, that'll be because of it being too windy. And then as it's landing and possibly lighting or possibly not lighting, that'll be dependent on fuel receptivity, which is temperature and humidity. So these weather factors allow us to really address what our risks are and then also figure out the timing of that risk. So I guess I already covered these before switching to this slide. But once again, as John mentioned, that's a reason to add to your pile to keep it short, a reason to pay attention to the weather conditions, to keep the wind from carrying embers away and landing in places outside of your safe 10-foot unit. And then fuel receptivity is really important, especially in these longer burn windows. None of us are really talking about trying to do pile burning in the middle of fire season, but you can still have long enough burn windows in a really good January or a fall situation that you could end up with a situation where you have sufficient dry grasses to receive embers. Here's a great little Smokey the Bear. Usually I'm critical, but I think they did a good job here. And here he is adding to an existing burn pile, keep the pile small, not tall. And once again, all this comes back to social license to use fire as a tool. We're really lucky that we seem to be making progress in that realm, but that's happened in the past and we've lost it. So really paying attention to these factors is how we keep it and expand it. So I stole this from Bryant Nagelson. He might even be on this call, and if he is, he should somehow take over the call because I think he knows more about this than I do. But he had a great metaphor here to use a funnel to describe how we can move from the broad regional level down to the local. And so in the next few slides, I already noticed there was a question about this. Where do you get your weather? I'll be moving in the same way he did in a story map I'll be sharing from that broad scale, understanding what's happening in general in your region down to your personal observation. Important thing to realize when it comes to weather is the weather that we kind of pick up on our phone, when you just click on the weather tab on your normal, on your phone. That weather is oriented towards kind of telling people whether or not they might want to bring a raincoat that day. Often, if you dig in a little deeper, it'll tell you that it might say rain on the forecast. Actually, they're saying 20% chance. And even of that 20% chance, it might be only a little bit during the day. So if you're relying on a shift in weather, for example, as part of your mop-up, part of your security, part of your containment, maybe even planning to, light the pile once the rain begins to fall, You really want to be looking more into the fire weather world, which is what I'm going to be showing you here. Also, I noticed that a lot of people on this call are PBA members interested in broadcast burning. I personally view every burn pile as sort of an experiment. You can treat this just as seriously. You can treat it like a prescribed fire, even if it's only 4 by 4 feet. You can even utilize it as a chance to learn more about some of your local plants and how they burn. So right there at the beginning, at the top level of this regional fire weather world, a website I really enjoy called Mezzo West. It's part of University of Utah. And what I love about this site is the way that they graph the weather trends that are expected over the next pretty short time period. So this is weather data tends to get better about a day, a decade, and we're really good about 5 days out these days. You start looking at the 10-day forecast, you'll find that it's not as good. But this kind of 18-hour forecast is pretty tight. And this particular graph here that we're looking at is able to show me both temperature, relative humidity, and dew point all in the same graph. And it allows me to really easily visualize when my temperature is low and my humidity is high, so my red line and my green line, and when my temperature is high and my humidity is low. So the fact that I can see those gaps so quickly in my head and then bring those down to the time makes decision points when it comes to lighting fires and points that I might need to be worried about fires really easy to do. So it's really easy to see on here. You can go up to this point right here. I'm trying to use the dot. You can see this right at 1500 hours, right at 3 o'clock. We've got a high point, a high, of 85 drawn down. Sorry, I'm going on the wrong side. High of 60 and drawn down to a relative humidity at just below, 20 degrees, something like that, 15 degrees. So the fact that I can see at what point I meet max humidity or min humidity and max temperature or min temperature really quickly gives me an idea of what the day is going to look like. Another really kind of regional level fire tool is the Northern California Geographic Coordinating Center. Here's a link to their website. It's a little bit long, but we can put it in the chat. And during fire season 2, this is a great one to be checking on. It's all color coordinated for you, really general, broad sense of what's going on. And one thing that's nice about starting to pay attention to this is if you are on the borders of any of these lines, if any of you live where the red meets the blue or the blue meets the brown or the purple meets the green, you can start to figure out which one of those regions you want to start paying attention to. And if you kind of get in, if you decide to do your first broadcast burn, for example, and it's the first time you've looked at this map, you might not know. In my situation, I'm right on the border between the coast and inland, and they give me dramatically different general weather trends. So by looking at that over time, I've managed to create sort of subtle patterns start developing into which ones you choose to look at or how you kind of moderate between the two. Digging down a little deeper, .gov is always a great thing to use on a website. Here the X is where I live. That kind of shows you how I'm right on the different regions for how they do this weather analysis. So by looking at both of these, you can start to learn. You can also use that same service to get yourself a spot weather forecast. And if we have time at the end, I can actually dig into that website and show you guys how to do that. So this is a point forecast. Sorry, it's not a spot weather forecast. A spot weather forecast would be specifically requested and is not necessary for pile burning. But this will give you a point forecast that'll be even more accurate than anything you've been getting. Wind Ninja, also probably overkill, but really fun to start learning and also free. It's part of the Missoula Fire Science Lab, and it will give you visualizations and wind predictions of wind direction, as John mentioned, can be really important, especially actually at smaller scales when you have more exposures. And then getting down to that finest, most, on the ground scale, I think it's never too soon if you're interested in fire to invest in a small weather station and a mobile weather station. Not only can it allow you to calibrate the forecasts you're getting and see if they err on one side or the other, but they can become extremely helpful if you ever do have issues. I use the example in here, if you were going to call up your local fire department or even some friends to come help, you're just, maybe you haven't had an escape, but you're just a little worried. The difference between it's getting a little windy over here, or I'm seeing sustained 8-mile-an-hour winds and gusting to 12, that can really, give a lot of confidence to people who are going to maybe be helping you. And then also learning to read the weather. Obviously, we're not going to get into that in this presentation, but understanding how clouds changing might predict weather changing can also allow you to modify and adapt your plans in real time. So if it's a burn pile, what really choices do you have? You have the choice as to whether or not to have lit it, but what can you do, before or after based on the weather? John, interestingly, we didn't coordinate these, but he covered a lot of these same things. I think thinking about how big a log you really want to have in there is a really important question. You kind of think about it like a sand timer. So the bigger the log, the bigger the sand timer, the bigger the weather window you need to be paying attention to, and the more time you're going to have to be spend out there tending your fire and keeping an eye on it. So, the big trees are not, the big down tree is not the one that's really, determining fire behavior. So in some case, leaving a log out, bucking them smaller, waiting till the next time. And as John also mentioned, getting a fire started and then adding some of those heavies, and also having additional dry fuel to add to continue to try to burn out, whether it's a log or a stump or whatever you're trying to get out that's really big. But in many cases, I think the first thing is to question, how important is it to get rid of this really large piece of fuel? In many cases, that's excellent habitat for a lot of animals, and it might be that the effort to get rid of that fuel is more than the benefit. In some cases, just as John mentioned, the leaf piles. One thing I just recommend is don't leave it on the top of a hill. Don't leave it right next to a road. I once spent, I think, 5 water trucks full of water putting out a pile of burls that someone had saved that they had just right on a ridge line, and they were ember casting deep into the next ridge. So we just had to get them out. So they can last for days, if not weeks. And then knowing the weather can also help you adapt to changing conditions. If you do have a kestrel, or how to read the clouds, or you're just updating your weather forecast, you have the options to expand your control line before you see an escape. You could start digging out another 5 feet. You have the choice to extinguish the fire, especially if it's not a big pile and you've been adding to it. Like, as John mentioned, allows an incredible amount of control for when you put it out, or you can do both. Though in some cases, I think, you were worried if it got windy, is it the right thing to start hacking at it with a McLeod? Probably not. You're actually going to increase ember cast. So kind of focusing on expanding your control line might be your best option if you don't have enough water to fully extinguish. So there's a few things about weather, and we can move to questions, or I can attempt pulling up a different screen and show you guys what I do for a point weather forecast.
Kyle, can you show us the point weather forecast? I think that would be helpful. We don't have a whole lot of weather questions right now.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Let's see. Screen share. And then go to here. Does anybody have a zip code or an area they want us to check? Pretty easy. We can just stick where I am. So first I just put my zip code, and that got me close. Is everybody seeing my screen?
We do.
And then you just scroll down to this map. It's a little bit funny, but all you do is you scroll down to this map, and can you see my clicker or just my screen?
We can see your clicker.
So this is where they thought I was in Potter Valley. That's actually over in the National Forest, and I'm over here. So you just kind of zoom in and move it over, and then it will refresh. And now when I come back down, now it's on my ranch. And in this case, it moved from, it was using a different closest location. And this is the location. I know I'm close enough because this Soda Creek location is the closest location for me to get a reasonable forecast. It doesn't have to be right on your dot, but if you get it right on your dot once, then you'll know what the closest location that they use for a point forecast. And I'm going to pull up, this is the story map that I mentioned that he just did an amazing job with. So this is a great place to review pretty much everything I just presented on.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle.
And he goes through that point forecast in more detail. It's kind of counterintuitive, but you just drag the map over and it refreshes, and there you are. A spot weather forecast is a specific request, and you need not anybody can just ask for one, but anybody can get this level of detail with the point forecast.